He told himself she would be easy to forget. He was wrong, and that mistake changed everything. Opal Montgomery was not the kind of woman who filled a room when she walked in. She was quiet, careful, the kind of person most people looked past without even realizing it. But Truett Crane was not most people. He was used to reading situations, reading people, fast, cold, precise. What he was not used to was being read back. She never tried to impress him. She never tried to soften him. She just showed up, did her job, and somehow got under his skin in a way no one had managed in years. He was a man who operated in shadows, who built walls the way other men built careers, deliberately, brick by brick. And she, without ever meaning to, made him want to open a door he had kept locked for a very long time. This is a story about two people who were never supposed to happen, about silence that says more than words, about the moment a man who controls everything realizes there is one thing he cannot control, and chooses her anyway. If you love a story that builds slow and hits deep, you are in the right place. Before we dive in, take a second to subscribe, leave a like, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you are watching from. We love knowing who is on the other side of the screen. Now, let's begin. He told himself she would be easy to forget. He was wrong, and that mistake changed everything. Opal Montgomery had spent the last 2 years building a life that worked on paper. She rented a one-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of an old building in Logan Square, Chicago, where the radiator knocked every night at 11, and the window above the kitchen sink looked out onto a brick wall she had stopped noticing months ago. She paid her bills on time. She called her mother every evening at 6:30, sitting on the edge of the bed with her shoes still on, because taking them off felt like admitting the day was over, and the day was rarely something she wanted to celebrate. Her mother, Patricia, was 61 and sick in the slow, expensive way that rearranged a person's entire life without asking permission. A degenerative condition in her spine had taken her mobility in stages. First the stairs, then the long walks, then most of her independence. And Opal had quietly reorganized everything around that fact. The postgraduate program she had been accepted to in Seattle, linguistics, full scholarship, had been deferred once, then again, then quietly let go of the way you let go of things you cannot afford to want anymore. She did not talk about it. She worked instead. Her Korean was near native, picked up during 3 years living in Busan after college, sharpened by years of medical interpretation work in clinics across the north side of the city. She was good at it, precise, calm, able to hold 2 languages in her mind simultaneously without losing the thread of either. It was not glamorous work. Most days it meant fluorescent-lit waiting rooms and exhausted doctors and patients who were scared in a language no one else in the room understood. But it paid. And paying was what mattered right now. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon while she was on the bus home, wedged between a man with a large paper bag and a teenager with headphones loud enough to share. The number was unfamiliar. The voice on the other end was male, unhurried, with the clipped efficiency of someone who did not expect to be questioned. He introduced himself only as a coordinator for a private consulting firm handling a multi-day negotiation. 3 sessions, downtown hotel. Rates he quoted without hesitation, a number that made Opal go very still in her seat. It was more than she made in a month. She asked 2 questions, the language pair and the subject matter, Korean and English, international trade and logistics. She said yes before he finished the sentence. She told herself it was just math, and it was, but there was something in the way the call ended. Clean, no pleasantries, as if her answer had already been assumed, that left a small unease she could not quite name, sitting just below her sternum on the rest of the ride home. She mentioned it to no one, Not to her friend Dana, who would have told her to look the firm up online. Not to her mother, who would have worried. She ironed her blouse that night, set her alarm for 6, and decided that unease was a luxury she could not currently afford. She had no idea that by Thursday afternoon, the most controlled man she had ever met would be watching her from across a mahogany table, already failing at something he had not yet admitted he had started. The hotel was called the Langham, and it sat on the Chicago River like it had always been there and always intended to stay. Opal had walked past it before. Everyone who spent enough time downtown had. But she had never had a reason to go inside. She did now. The lobby was the kind of quiet that cost money, all warm stone and low lighting, and the faint smell of something floral she could not identify. Her canvas tote felt suddenly conspicuous against the polished surfaces, and she resisted the urge to hold it differently. She was here to work. She reminded herself of that twice before she reached the elevator. The meeting room on the 12th floor was already occupied when she arrived. 4 men sat around a long mahogany table, 2 on one side speaking quietly in Korean, 1 near the window reviewing something on a tablet, and 1 at the head of the table who was not doing anything at all. He was simply sitting there, with his arms crossed and his eyes on the door, as if he had known exactly when it would open. That was Truett Crane. Opal registered him the way you register something that does not quite fit the category you were expecting. He was younger than she had assumed from the phone call, mid-30s, with the kind of face that was hard to look at casually and impossible to look at carefully without losing a second or two. Dark hair, sharp jaw, and eyes that were neither warm nor cold, but something more unsettling than either. Attentive. She crossed the room, introduced herself to the group, and took the seat indicated near the center of the table. Truett did not introduce himself. He simply gave a single nod, the kind that said he had registered her arrival and filed it somewhere, and then redirected his attention to the men across from him. The session began. For the first hour, Opal worked with the focused efficiency that had always been her professional signature. She translated cleanly, without editorializing, keeping her voice level and her pacing deliberate. The negotiation was dense: shipping routes, exclusivity clauses, penalty structures. And she kept both sides moving without losing nuance. What she noticed, and filed quietly away, was that Truett listened to the Korean side of the table with the same attention he gave the English, which meant he understood more than he was letting on. She did not comment on this. About 90 minutes in, one of the Seoul representatives used an expression that did not translate cleanly, a colloquial phrase that technically meant one thing, but implied something considerably sharper in context. Opal paused, just briefly, choosing her words. "He said the timeline is optimistic," she said, "but the subtext is closer to, they find it insulting." The room shifted. Truett looked at her then, not with surprise exactly, but with the particular attention of someone recalibrating. "Say that again," he said. It was the first time he had spoken directly to her. His voice was low and unhurried, the same register as the man on the phone, but warmer in person in a way that she immediately decided not to think about. She repeated it. He held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary, then turned back to the table and adjusted his entire approach to the next point of negotiation. He did not thank her, but something in the room had changed, and they both felt it, and neither of them said so. The second day was supposed to be easier. Opal told herself that on the bus ride downtown, watching the city slide past the window in shades of gray and early gold. She had done the hard part, shown up, proven herself, survived the first session without losing her composure. Today was just work. She believed that right up until the elevator doors opened on the 12th floor, and she found Truett already in the corridor, leaning against the wall with a coffee cup in one hand and his jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled to the forearm, looking like a man who had been there long enough to make the hallway his. He straightened when he saw her. Not dramatically, just a small shift in posture, the kind a person makes without deciding to. "You're early," he said. "So are you," she said. He almost smiled. It was not quite a smile, more like the idea of one, restrained at the last second. But she caught it, and it did something small and inconvenient to her pulse that she chose to ignore. They walked into the meeting room together without discussing it, and that small, unremarkable fact settled somewhere in Truett's chest in a way he did not examine too closely. Inside, the morning session covered penalty clauses and delivery windows, and Opal worked with the same clean precision as the day before. But something had shifted in the room's atmosphere, subtle, like a change in pressure before weather. The sole representatives were warmer with her now, occasionally directing remarks to her directly before translation was needed. One of them, a man named Mr. Beck, commented in Korean that she had excellent Seoul dialect for an American. Opal thanked him in kind, and across the table she heard Truett exhale. Not quite a laugh, but adjacent to one. She did not look at him. She did not need to. During the midday break, the other men dispersed, phones out, calls to make, and Opal stayed at the table with her notes, finishing a glass of water and reviewing the afternoon agenda. She was aware, without looking up, that Truett had not left. He was standing at the window with his back to the room, looking out at the river, and the silence between them was the comfortable kind, which was its own kind of problem. "Your dialect," he said finally, still facing the window. "How long were you in Korea?" 3 years, Busan mostly. He turned then and leaned his shoulder against the window frame, studying her with that same unhurried attention she was starting to recognize as simply how he looked at things he found worth understanding. "What made you come back?" The question was genuine. She could tell the difference. She was good at that. And it caught her slightly off guard because no one in a professional context had ever asked her that, not the way he did, like the answer actually mattered. "My mother got sick," she said simply. He nodded once, slowly, and did not follow it with the automatic condolences people usually reached for. He just held the information with the same steadiness he seemed to hold everything, and she found, unexpectedly, that she preferred it. What Truett did not say, what he kept carefully behind his eyes, was that in that single sentence she had told him more about herself than most people revealed in an hour, and that he was paying attention in a way that had nothing to do with the negotiation anymore. The third and final day of negotiations arrived, with a cold front that pushed in off the lake overnight, dropping the temperature by 15 degrees, and turning the Chicago morning into something sharp and unforgiving. Opal felt it the moment she stepped outside her building, that specific bite of wind that the city saved for days when it wanted to remind you it was still in charge. She pulled her coat tighter and walked to the bus stop, and somewhere across the city, in a hotel room on the 14th floor, with a view of the river she had never seen, Truett Crane was standing at the window with his first coffee of the morning, watching the same cold front move across the water, thinking about a woman he had known for exactly 2 days and could not stop noticing. He had not slept particularly well. This was not unusual for him. Sleep had always been a negotiation, but the specific reason for last night's restlessness was new, and he did not appreciate novelty when it arrived uninvited. He kept returning to the break, to the window, to the way she had said my mother got sick with such complete absence of self-pity that it had landed somewhere behind his ribs and stayed there. He was not a sentimental man. He had built an entire life around the strategic management of sentiment, his own and everyone else's. And yet, he finished his coffee and told himself to focus. The final session was the most complex. Exit clauses, arbitration terms, a disagreement over jurisdiction that had been simmering since day one. Opal arrived 7 minutes before the hour, same as both previous days, and this time Truett was already seated at the table. He did not look up when she entered, which she noticed, and she took her seat without comment, which he noticed. The morning moved fast. By 11, the Soul side had pushed back hard on 2 separate clauses, and the room had developed the particular tension of people who were tired and running out of patience. Opal worked carefully, choosing words with the precision of someone diffusing something delicate. At one point, Mr. Beck's tone shifted, sharper, more clipped, and she translated it faithfully, including the edge. Truett looked at her across the table. She gave him the smallest nod. He turned back and addressed the point directly, calmly, without escalating, and within 20 minutes, the clause was resolved. During a lunch break, the group moved to a smaller dining room the hotel had arranged. The atmosphere loosened, food had that effect, and conversation drifted away from business. Opal sat near the end of the table, quieter now that her professional role had softened. She was aware of Truett 2 seats away, aware of the way he listened more than he spoke, aware that once, when she said something that made Mr. Beck laugh, Truett's gaze moved to her face, with an expression she could not fully read, but felt nonetheless, warm and specific, like a hand placed carefully on the back of her shoulder, without touching. The final session wrapped at 4:30. Agreements were signed, hands were shaken. The Soul representatives expressed satisfaction in formal, gracious terms, and directed a particular compliment toward Opal that made the room smile. She thanked them in Korean, which earned a genuine laugh, and then it was over. The men gathered their things, the room began to empty, and Opal stood at the end of the table, sliding her notes into her tote, feeling the strange deflation that follows the end of something that had quietly started to matter before she had thought to be careful about it. Truett found her in the corridor. She had taken the long way out, past the window that looked over the river, the one she had admired quietly on the first day and never mentioned. And he had followed without fully deciding to. That was the part he could not account for later. The decision had already been made somewhere below the level of strategy, in a place he did not usually let run things. Opal. She stopped and turned, and the late afternoon light coming through the glass caught her face in a way that made something tighten in his chest without permission. She was still holding her tote, still in her coat, already halfway back to the version of her life that had nothing to do with him. The work was excellent, he said. It was true, and it was also not what he had followed her to say. And from the way she looked at him, patient, unhurried, waiting, he suspected she understood that. "Thank you," she said. "It was an interesting 3 days. I'd like to take you to dinner." He said it the way he said most things, directly, without decoration. But there was something underneath it that was neither professional nor casual, and it landed in the space between them with a weight they both felt. She looked at him for a moment, not calculating, just honest, the way she did everything. "Truett, what is this?" "Dinner," he said. "That's all I'm offering right now." She almost smiled. Almost. "That's a very careful answer." "I'm a careful man. I've noticed." But she said yes. Not because the money had been good, or because the week had been long, or because she was lonely, though some of those things were true in their quiet ways. She said yes, because for 3 days she had watched this man hold an entire room together with precision and control. And in the break at the window, he had asked her a question that no one in her professional life had ever thought to ask, and had listened to the answer like it was the most important thing in the room. They went to a Korean restaurant 2 blocks from the hotel, small, unassuming, the kind of place with handwritten menus and tables close enough together that you kept your voice low by instinct. Truett had chosen it without explanation, and when the owner greeted him by name, Opal raised an eyebrow and he said, simply, "I eat here when the work keeps me downtown." And she understood that this was one of the few places in his life that did not require him to perform anything. She found that unexpectedly moving. They ordered, they talked, not about the negotiation, that chapter had closed cleanly, but about the city, about Busan, about the particular loneliness of being good at something that kept you slightly separate from everyone around you. Truett did not talk about himself the way people usually did, filling space with resume and achievement. He talked in observations, in questions, in the kind of quiet interest that made her feel, for the first time in longer than she could remember, genuinely seen. At one point, his hand rested on the table close to hers, not touching, just near, and neither of them moved it. When the food came, she watched him eat with the same contained ease he brought to everything, and thought, against her better judgment, that she was in some degree of trouble. What she did not know was that across the table, Truett was thinking the exact same thing, and that for a man who had spent 15 years making sure he was never in a position he could not walk away from, the feeling was entirely new. And he did not reach for the exit. 3 weeks had passed since the night at the restaurant, and in that time, Opal had learned that Truett Crane was not a man who did things halfway. He called when he said he would. He showed up when he said he would. He asked questions and remembered the answers, not performatively, but in the way of someone who filed things carefully because they mattered. She had met him for coffee twice, for a walk along the lakefront once, and each time the space between them had closed a little more naturally, a little less carefully, like two people slowly trusting the ground beneath their feet. And then the call came, not from him, from one of his associates, a man she had never met, with a voice that was professionally neutral in the way of someone delivering a message they had been told to deliver exactly as written. He informed her that her services would no longer be required for any future engagements with the firm, that a non-disclosure agreement had been prepared, that there was a figure attached, generous, in exchange for her signature and her silence. She sat with the phone in her hand for a long time after the call ended. The apartment was quiet around her, the radiator ticking at the far wall, the brick outside the kitchen window exactly the same as it had always been. She thought about what the call meant. She thought about who had sent it. And then she signed the agreement. Not for the money, though the money mattered, it always mattered, but because she believed, with the particular clarity of someone who had learned to read silences, that the instruction had come from Truett, that she had been handled. She did not call him. She did not explain. She simply stepped back into the version of her life that had existed before the Langham, before the mahogany table, before a man at a window had asked her why she came home, and listened like the answer was the most important thing in the room. She went back to the clinics. She called her mother. She did not cry, because she was practical, and crying required a certainty of loss she was still negotiating with herself. It was Dana who told her, 2 weeks later, that there had been an article, small, buried in a business section she never read, a quiet announcement that Truett Crane had formally withdrawn from several of the firm's operational divisions. A restructuring, the article called it. Dana read it aloud over the phone with the tone of someone who did not fully understand why she was reading it, but sensed it mattered. Opal said nothing. She set the phone down on the counter and stood in her kitchen for a long moment, and something she had pressed down very carefully began, slowly, to come loose. The knock came on a Thursday evening. She knew before she opened the door, He was standing in the hallway, in a dark jacket, no tie, with the specific look of a man who had rehearsed nothing and was proceeding anyway. "I didn't send that call," he said. "I know who did. I handled it. And I know that doesn't fix what you thought." She looked at him, at the steadiness in his face, at the thing behind his eyes that was not strategy, and not performance, but something quieter and considerably more frightening for both of them. "Why are you here, Truett?" "Because I made a decision," he said, "and it had nothing to do with the firm, or the contract, or any of it. It had to do with the fact that I haven't been able to think clearly since you told me why you came back from Korea. And I'm not interested in pretending that's manageable anymore." The hallway was very quiet. Opal felt something shift in the center of her chest, not breaking, but opening, the way a window opens when the latch finally gives. She stepped back from the door. He stepped inside. And then she looked at him and said, "You were supposed to be easy to forget." The corner of his mouth moved. "I've been told I'm not great at easy." She laughed, a real one, the kind that surprised her. And he crossed the small distance between them and kissed her in the way she had imagined and refused to imagine. Slow and deliberate and certain, his hand coming up to the side of her face, like she was something he had decided to stop being careful about. She held on to the front of his jacket and kissed him back, with everything she had been quietly carrying for weeks. And neither of them was in a hurry, and neither of them pulled away first. And in the small apartment with the knocking radiator and the brick wall outside the window, something that had been closed for a very long time opened up in both of them and did not close again. Outside, Chicago moved at its usual pace, indifferent, enormous, alive. But in that moment, in that hallway, the whole city could have waited. If this story moved you the way it moved us to tell it, drop a number from 1 to 10 in the comments. We genuinely want to know what you thought. And thank you, truly, for spending this time with Opal and Truett. Stories like this one only live because you choose to listen. We will see you in the next one.